Good morning, everyone. Just before we get started, Catherine, it's made you the host. I think it might have been because you were the first one in. Would you be able to change that over to me? So if you hover on my name, it will say give permission to host.
Sorry about that.
That's fine. I don't know why it defaults. My name should be registered on it, but you can just hover over and pass it over.
Yeah, I've done it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Right. Good morning, Julian. Oh, you're muted, I think.
That's all right. Sorry. How are you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
Right. Yeah.
Yes. Good. Okay, so I'm hosting you today. I'll put a welcome slide up. Do you want me to monitor the chat for you? Do you want to come to that at the end, or do questions at the end?
I think dealing with the chat as I'm doing it is challenging. So I'd rather try and do it at the end. But if there are, I'm happy to be really flexible, Amy. So just kind of go with whatever. If there's something that kind of really comes out that is worth addressing, I'm happy to do it. So, but yeah, it can be quite disjointed going into the chat. So that would be great.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye out. If there are any connection issues or anything, when you're sharing your screen, I don't know if you can see the chat. With me, it disappears.
I can see it. Yeah, I mean, I had to do it on my own on Tuesday, and there was a lot of people there, and there was a lot of chat coming through, and it was bloody hard work, I have to say.
Oh gosh, okay. Oh, you should have had somebody with you.
Well, Andy's wife fainted, and so he had to go.
Yes, yeah.
So what's the quality of the video like?
It's a bit. Oh, that's better.
These old work laptops are really rubbish. I'm just going to change the lighting a little bit.
Yeah.
Hang on a sec. Let's try this. Is that better?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I'll record the session as well, if that's okay. And we'll let people know about that.
And obviously, Amy, I'm talking about action learning sets. And if you want to kind of add any of your thoughts because of the one that we set up for the management team, then by all means.
Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to it. I was quite glad I got this one. I would have been here anyway. So yeah, absolutely happy to.
Yeah, don't set your expectations too high, Amy.
Oh dear. Well, I've done many throughout the week. I think most of them have gone quite well. It's
good. Yeah, my name is Ingle, not Ingles, as it appears on there. There's no S on the end of my name, so I think in the.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's okay. I think we've made you multiple. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll point that out.
Yeah, it's not Little House on the Prairie.
No. Okay. All right, let me share this slide for you.
So I'm doing. I mean, I'm doing it kind of because I've had, you know, I haven't had a huge amounts of time to do. I've just got a PowerPoint that I'm going to talk through.
Fantastic, fantastic. Yeah, it's however works for you. Okay, right. I'll just share this and we'll wait for everyone else to come in. And obviously we've got you can do a private chat with me if there is anything that you need to grab attention for.
I'm just going to check the settings for audio video versus text based, because I know that that
Is
has.
this going to share any video?
I'm not going to share any video, but I am in my session at 2, and I think as the person that is the host, or not, because I'm not the host, I don't think I've got access to the settings that between.
Yeah, I said this yesterday. When you share video, when you bring up your share, the first kind of click, there's an option at the top which is defaulted to text and image. And you drop that down, and there's an option for audio.
I
and video.
get it to. I mean, I couldn't get it to. I couldn't find it when I tried. But it did work. But I just wondered whether it was a hosting thing. Well, hopefully this time it will be better.
Yeah, we can.
I mean, for the 2 o'clock session, not for.
You can always get in there a bit early and.
Yeah, I'll do that with who's hosting? Do you know who's hosting my 2 o'clock?
I can find out for you. I've got a feeling it's Stuart. Let me just check.
Oh, great. That'd be nice. Can we be heard now, Amy?
We can, yes. So if you want to mute yourself till we get started in a minute.
Yeah. Just the other one thing is just I have got my clock on, but just if there are kind of timing, if it starts going on a bit too long, hopefully it won't. It should be fine. But ping me a chat.
Yes, I will do. Yeah. Yeah, I think we've been able.
I was aiming for half an hour, but it might be a little longer. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we're down for the hour. So
yeah,
we'll be 50 minutes because it gives people a chance to
change
over.
Okay, I'm going to mute video and audio.
Good morning, everybody. I make it 11:15, so we'll get started in a second. I would like to welcome you to our session today, using the principles of action learning sets for personal tutoring and small groups. We have Julian Ingle with us here, who is Deputy Director of ASK, to share his expertise. I can very much vouch for him in this area, as he's done some work with us as a team as well. As with all of the sessions, we will be recording, so if you don't want to be captured on the recording, please mute your microphone and turn your video off. You still have the option of using the chat. The chat isn't featured as part of the recording, so that's worth noting. If you have any questions or anything, you can post them in the chat. Julian will pick them up at the appropriate time. So without further ado, Julian, I will hand over to you and stop sharing my screen now.
Thanks, Amy. Welcome, everybody. I see there's already some questions coming through in the chat. We will try and pick those up at the end. I'm just going to share my screen with you now. Okay, so I hope that's clear, and with the usual caveats of internet surges and so on and so forth, hopefully this will be okay. But if there are problems hearing me, or you get some kind of technical issue you sense it from my end, then do let us know. This might seem a little bit disconnected and away from the Telltales Festival about technology enhanced learning, but one of the reasons I've decided to do a session on this is that I've been involved in the work strand that is thinking about belonging and how to foster strong connections between students in this new online world. So my questions are, how do we build a sense of community among students, enable friendships, to become a part of university life? And so I think this is why, for me, some of the things that we can learn from action learning may be helpful in thinking about how we create these social online spaces and communities. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the action learning process, a little history, and then hopefully by showing you how a typical action learning set works, you'll be able to see for yourselves some of the principles of action learning, and then decide whether you think it could be a valuable heuristic, both in your personal tutorial work, or in seminars or in group work that you do. I've been using this way of working and way of thinking for many years. I use it in my one-to-one tutorials all the time. Previously, I ran a whole module as an action learning set. It was a module for Japanese students on a year abroad at the university I was working at, and I ran that for several years. It was very interesting, challenging, but also very rewarding. So, what are action learning sets? Well, basically, it's, as the name suggests, it's group-based learning, and the use of the term set conveys the idea that there is a fixed membership to this group and that it continues over a period of time. So they meet periodically. They're led by a facilitator who should have some experience of group dynamics and reflective working, but it's not necessary. You don't have to be an expert in reflective practice, but it does help. And in itself, it's a process of learning and reflection in which the set provides guidance with particular individuals' problems or issues, with the main intention of trying to get things done. Okay, and we'll come to what we mean by an action a little bit later. Action learning itself begins with Reg Revans, and that's interesting for us because he was from Portsmouth, and so I think that adds a nice connection. it has over the years, it's become very popular in organizational development and management contexts. He began using it widely after the Second World War. He himself was a very interesting man, an Olympian. He worked as an astrophysicist, an educational administrator, a university professor, and then his career culminated in becoming an international management consultant. It became very widely used in the coal boards and some of the problems around the coal industry. It was then taken up by the NHS and is still widely used in the NHS. And then gradually, for over a decade or so, it's been used more widely in education. And I think it's been around for well over a decade. And actually, interestingly, in the business school, in business and law, there are a group of academics who are very heavily involved in action learning. This year, they were supposed to be hosting the biannual conference of the Action Learning Journal, and sadly, it had to be cancelled because of the pandemic. So there is real expertise within the institution itself. And there's an interesting point there as well about because of Reg Reverence's background, you can see that he straddles a lot of disciplines and areas, and I think that's what's particularly interesting about action learning, is that it is transdisciplinary. His famous quote is, there can be no learning without action and no action without learning. I also like his quote about action learning being the upward communication of doubt. I'll leave that one with you. And it has three main components: people who take responsibility for taking action on a particular area or issue, the problems that people set themselves or identify for themselves, and most importantly, a set of people who support, question, and enable each other to make progress on the problems or issues that they've identified. And it's this idea that an action on a problem changes both the problem and the person who's acting on it. And it does question or open up questioning of taken for granted knowledge. So a typical action learning set, and I should add that there are lots of varieties of action learning. This is a very traditional, typical kind of template of an action learning set. Normally the learning set would include 5 to 8 people, and they meet with a facilitator on a regular basis every 4 to 6 weeks, and they would usually meet for an hour or two in those sessions. Each person takes it in turn to be the presenter, and so they bring with them a real problem or issue that they wish to progress. So if we were thinking about a student, it would be a problem or issue to do with their studies, okay? And then the presenter presents their problem and the whole set works together on this problem with the individual. Gradually, through this process, the aim is for the person to identify a series of actions or some action that they can use to address the problem. And in this process, they're reflecting on and learning from the actions as they progress. It doesn't just stop with one presenter presenting their problem, there is a follow-up process as well. Importantly, ground rules are required for the set to function. Those ground rules are determined by the set themselves, and so typically that would include things like confidentiality, the idea that the person who presents his particular problem or issue, that stays within the set. Okay, so members of the set are not allowed to discuss that person's problem outside of the set. Obviously, the person presenting can discuss it with others, but the members of the set are not have to keep the set content confidential. One person speaks at a time, Okay, one person presents, okay, and set members really have to listen. And importantly, it's important that the presenter uses the I form when they're talking about the problem. So they don't say, you know, you can see this problem here. They say, I see this problem as. It's really fundamental that they try and personalize that problem. Okay, so that's the basic structure of an action learning set. So how it works and the process is that the presenter sets out a problem or issue that they're having, okay? And then through questioning, the set members clarify the problem to get a full picture, okay? They ask questions to help the presenter define and redefine and think about their problem and their relationship to it. This process can take a bit of time. And the idea is that the facilitator ensures that the ground rules are followed, that the set keeps on track, and that at the end of coming towards the end of the presenter's time or turn in a set, that they move towards identifying some concrete and specific actions. Okay. The way that I've used it and the way that I do use it and the way that I think it is useful to use is that it just uses questioning. Okay. So we avoid the telling, giving advice or prescribing what to do. And so the presenter themselves gradually comes to an understanding of what it is that they might do. Inevitably, if you are thinking about working with students in this way, it gives students great insight into question forms themselves, so command questions, open questions, probing questions, reflective, closed, comparative, leading. That awareness in itself is itself very useful. But behind this is the principle, the presenter is the expert on themselves. And the best person to identify possible actions is the presenter or the person talking about their particular issue or problem. I mean, we've all experienced that situation of those quick conversations. Oh, I've got a problem with this. Oh, we'll do that. 9 times out of 10, we tend to ignore the advice we're given. So I think that's part of the premise of action learning, that the individual is the expert on themselves, because what works for him or her may not work for somebody else. And so me giving suggestions of what to do, that might work for me, but inevitably may not work for others. Actions themselves are not just those kind of concrete things of digging a hole. No, actions can be both concrete, specific things, but they can also be more abstract. So it could be that an action is perhaps a new way of understanding something, a new way of conceptualizing or framing an issue that you're dealing with or confronting. So it doesn't have to be something that is really concrete in that sense. It can be more abstract as well. I think what's really interesting as well is that the reframing and reconceptualizing process in the set that happens through the set gives others a lot of insight into their own thinking and their own issues. And so, because each person takes it in turn to present, and that they become responsible for determining the actions that they're going to take, then the presenter has to take responsibility for their situation, for their problem, and how they manage and work with it. So this would be a typical graphic of the action learning process itself, this cyclical exploration, understanding, action, feeding back, because once the actions have been completed at the next set, before the next presenter presents, there is a feedback discussion about how the actions progressed, any thoughts and reflections on that action and those actions, and how they might carry on in the future. I think what's really interesting as well is that in this process, the facilitator ideally should gradually become more and more invisible, and so that the set takes responsibility itself for the process and becomes almost self-facilitating. Okay, what's happened here? Okay, so that's a kind of whistle-stop tour of an action learning set. So now I want to think about, well, what are the principles that we could infer from action learning? So I think the principles are that the set provides the conditions and the space for very careful reflection, a structure for a process, and time, importantly, time for students to struggle with and reflect on their existing knowledge and understanding. This reflection happens with the guidance and support of others and opens up reflective dialogue and critically reflective learning. Drilling down a little bit, an action learning set, I think, encourages equality of participation. Everybody takes a turn, everybody is listened to carefully and attended to and taken seriously. Action learning sets should also always be voluntary. They can't be prescribed. And I think, following on from equality of participation, they're also personalised. Each presenter has a meaningful amount of time devoted to the issue that concerns them. But it's a collective endeavour. The set works together to unpack what's going on and to help the presenter identify ways forward. Inevitably, it's incredibly dialogical, but it's not a therapy group. The problem is about, I mean, in the world of work, when it's used in management cultures, it's about management problems. So it's not a therapy group. In the world of studies, when I've used it with students, it's about identifying issues with their studies, with their experience at university. It does obviously tip over into developing emotional literacy without a shadow of a doubt, because often we're confronted with quite challenging and difficult issues or problems that we have to help a person manage. What I particularly found valuable when I was running it as a module was that it was authentic and meaningful. So the tasks that the students identified for themselves to do were for them real world tasks. And as a result of that, their actions had much more meaning and impact on them as individuals. You could easily argue that it's co-creative. As you move to a more self-facilitating set, then this collective endeavour creates this co-creative world that is non-hierarchical. And for me, I think an important dimension is that problems and failures are not seen as something that can disempower a person or blocks and stop them from acting, that actually they're opportunities to learn from. And I think, particularly in our higher educational culture and educational culture full stop, there is this discourse of success, and I think sometimes that overlooks the importance of failure. Sorry, the bins are being done outside. I also particularly, and I think when it's been used in scientific communities, it's often been used in teams of scientists working in labs. It draws on an idea or an ideology that knowledge is distributed and distributed among the scientists. And so I think that also is reflected in an action learning set. If you've experienced an action learning set, or if you've facilitated one, what you observe is that participants appreciate the advantages of the alternative and differing opinions and perceptions of different approaches of their peers, as well as those of the program facilitator. Actually, listening to others articulate and think through their problems provides insight into our own thinking and problems and issues as well. So it has a real benefit of learning from others. It sounds a little bit neat the way that I presented it. I'm just giving you a really stripped down version. But this cycle of reflection, action and learning yeah, it sounds like it's neat, but actually it can also be very messy. And part of the skill of the facilitator and the set itself as it evolves is to help the presenter and each group within that to really clarify and identify and point to ways forward with a particular problem. Other benefits, and I think these are really important, of action learning are, I've mentioned taking ownership. I think empathy and listening are really key. Developing a stronger sense of compassion, I think, is something that definitely comes out. The action learning set should be at times challenging, but also supportive. I think it helps with an understanding of group dynamics. I think you do see that in action, and it certainly helps with goal setting and target setting, because as the group progresses, they become more experienced and more expert at setting clear and achievable goals. So I think it does allow for the management of emotion and conflict, and creating rapport and empathy, giving and receiving feedback, because that's part of the process of being questioned. Again, inevitably, to clarify what's happening with a person and to think about what might work for them implies the ability to use language effectively. As the set becomes more self-facilitating, it can be that people take it in turns to facilitate the action learning set. So they learn facilitation skills. And again, I think this understanding of questioning that really does drive thinking is really valuable. In our own context, it links very nicely to the coaching culture that is encouraged at the university. And I think that it has that potential to build a strong sense of belonging. If you were to, you can take some of the principles of action learning, but if you were to run an action learning set, it does require very careful setting up. And so in the past, ways that typically people set up and ways that learning sets is to use what's known as triads. So you work in groups of 3, you have a presenter, an enabler, and a reporter. So the enabler is a kind of facilitator. Each person takes that role. They then go through a particular problem in a short space of time. The rest of the set can observe. So you can do it in kind of goldfish bowl style. Equally, after you've done that, you then change roles. So each person has the experience of being a facilitator, a presenter, and a reporter, and to observe the process of the action learning set, and then the reporter feeds back each time. So it would require quite careful practicing, setting up, low stakes practice to get an understanding of the dynamics and how an action learning set works. Oh, hello, that's just come in. That was missing. So yeah, you can see this idea of the processes and the facilitation and the task in context. So these are some observations about action learning. So I'm just going to have to move this chat box. They're often very surprising, I've found. Focus on task versus process is interesting. Because it has this individualized, personalized process or focus, it is about the development of the individual. I was alluding to this question about the role of the facilitator. I think there is a danger that you can get this overly safe environment, and there can be some collusion. I think that can be something that you have to be really wary of. I've used, as I said, I've used it in modules, I've assessed it. I think Phyllis raises, I think, some very interesting questions about how you would assess this way of working. I think the set itself, how you would assess those processes, I think, is interesting and actually, you know, entirely viable. I think the problem usually comes in when you bring in an assessment like, well, so now I want you to write a reflective essay on your action learning set and on your so and so, and that often turns into quite a formulaic and not a particularly valuable way of capturing the transformations and the development that have gone in action learning sets. If I were to be assessing an action learning set, I would do it through the set itself. I would possibly try and do it in a co-creative way, where I would ask the set themselves to determine how they would evaluate the set, what would be the criteria, what would need to be in place, how would they know it was successful, and so on. And I would do it through conversations and perhaps through an observation of an action learning set, so that they can see the conversation in action. Those are questions for people who may be interested in formalizing action learning sets. And I have been wondering whether there is a space in the curriculum for this way of working, thinking particularly about students coming into university, returning to university, without the social infrastructures that happen naturally and organically. How do we enable that? And although this is a formalized structure, would action learning be one way of building a strong sense of community and this strong sense of belonging? So I think that's really all I want to say about action learning. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts or any questions or comments. So I will just stop sharing and open the floor to questions. Thank you very much for your patience.
Julian, thank you very much. Nick Capon from Business and Law. Thank you very much for an interesting and thought-provoking talk. Could you try and give an answer to the chat question I put at the beginning of the session, starting "Hi Amy" while we're waiting to start?
Okay. Yes. I don't know the answer to that, Nick, but I do know that in our work strand, we are looking at ways of trying to find options for creating social groups within modules and also outside the curriculum. So I know in CCI there's some work going on at the moment where some staff are looking at the creation of social groups for students that aren't part of the curriculum. I'm convening a forum for level 4 course coordinators who are running the study skills modules to look at this question of building small social groups in order to promote or to help foster that sense of belonging. I don't know whether Amy has any thoughts about what's in the template or ideas that are coming through about small group learning out of large lecture groups and what's being recommended.
Hi there, Nick. Yes, I did see that. I wasn't sure if you meant, is this about the timetabling? So how is the timetabler going to split up what would be a large group in terms of small groups, or are you thinking about how to do it in Moodle?
No, I think Catherine's subsequent question was how it fits in with timetabling. My question was, how do you get this sense, if you've got, I don't know, 100 people and you're doing the first knowledge bit, splitting it into small chunks, that's all very understandable. The next bit of the template says group activity. And if you've got 100 people, what is the plan for splitting that 100 into small groups, which you could then apply some of the ideas of this workshop very successfully too. But, you know, in the past, we've been split up into seminar groups of 15 or 20 that have been timetabled. What's going to be done in this new virtual world to create these small groups where friendships can be formed, discussion, you know, because what's been described at the moment, this group activity, doesn't seem anything to do with group. It just seems to be setting quizzes for people to do individually, nothing group about it at all.
Ah, I see what you mean. Okay, so what you can do in that group collaborative space is set up groups. So you would be able to, say at the start of the module, split your 100 people into smaller groups of 5 to 10. I think the way forward would be to stick them in those groups, and you could ask them to have some sort of introductory meeting. And there has been quite a lot of discussion, which I appreciated throughout the week, about enabling the students to find a space to communicate where they want to. So that might be something like WhatsApp, or it might be Instagram, or Discord was mentioned as well. So a space where they can have a chat without the tutor. And then what you can do in the VLE is any activity that you set up can be responded to as a group. So you can either say nominate somebody from your group to post their response, or you could say that everybody has to do something from the group and post. So I think the collaboration bit, if you want it to happen asynchronously in Moodle, would be to use those groups and the group settings. Tom Langston is your person if you want to have a sort of demo on how to set those groups up. But I think it's a really good way forward to have set groups and to keep the students in those groups as they go through.
Okay, thank you very much, Amy. So there isn't any possibility of doing action learning in those groups?
There would be, but you would be you'd be repeating yourself unless Julian has a way for it to work potentially with larger groups. But I think it's, for me, I think this comes into its own in that face-to-face contact time that you do get, and also the personal tutoring time as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'd add to that. Amy's right. I think it doesn't work with larger groups. I think it need to be, you know, up to about 8 or 9 from practice. I have run it with slightly lot. The problem is that the time factor, and as what one of the questions came through about, it is one problem per person per meeting. Effectively, there is also, as the group gets going, there is also a feedback process as well about reporting back on how those actions evolved. You can run them, you know, and how long it takes. You can, if the groups are reasonable size, you can run the session in an hour. I realise that there are constraints on personal tutoring. What flexibility there is in this new situation, I don't know. But I mean, you know, maybe you wouldn't be able to use create an action learning set out of your tutorial group, but you could begin to use some of the principles and some of the practices, and maybe expose students to action learning. I think it could be good. I'd certainly, Tanya, I'd certainly think it's a really valuable tool for teacher training. Or I think it's the critical incident scenarios that I've worked with students on those. I think in certain disciplines as well, where it has a much stronger vocational focus, I think it has a real value, and it's used a lot in teaching. I can give you an example of problems. I mean, it's a while since I've run an action learning set as a module, but when I ran one with this group of Japanese students who were at university for a year, obviously obviously it was a big educational and cultural shift for them to come into this way of working, and we spent a lot of time sitting in silence, and they were very good at that. I was not so good at that, and I learned the value of silence. So there was a lot of silence. The premise behind the module that I was running was that these Japanese students felt like they were disconnected from the university, and that they weren't improving their language abilities in the ways that they anticipated. And so that was the kind of the underlying area that the module was designed to address. And so students would come up with, well, I want to experience more of English culture and have more opportunities to meet English people in London from a range of backgrounds. And I remember one student identified a series of actions about, well, maybe finding some voluntary work or some part-time work, and she went to work in Oxfam, and it was absolutely transformative. So it can be something quite small and simple, but it can be something quite big. Yeah, I mean, and then obviously, well, not obviously, but in that particular module, there were concerns about written English, and so how might I find ways of improving my written English effectively. And they identified strategies and actions that they could use. Yeah, and going back to Tony's point, it does have, historically, it has a very strong professional basis in action learning. It's used in management cultures an awful lot, and generally speaking, the idea is that everybody is on the same level. So when we started them in DCQE, all of us were heads of section, and so there has to, where possible, it has to be non-hierarchical, which I realise with the personal tutoring, there is a slight shift, but that doesn't have to be problematic. I do, and I have experienced, and actually, once students have got the idea, I'm responding to I think Nick's point about the invisibility of the facilitator. Actually, they soon become quite self-facilitating, just through the process of questioning. And one of the things I've been thinking about, and I'm looking at Heather's comment, and is that, and I'm discussing this as part of the work strand, is how could we incorporate some of this into this new blended way of teaching and learning. And perhaps it would be, I would suggest, I guess, I don't know, students are always surprising. It would be quite a big step up for first years, but you could begin to introduce the ideas around action learning, and then gradually, into the second and third year, then would there be space for actually running and piloting some action learning sets within the curriculum? I've been talking a lot with Denise Mayer, Head of Student Wellbeing Service, and she's very familiar with this way of working. And I think there is what action learning offers is this the kinds of developing the kinds of emotional literacy around things like compassion and empathy that I think would be particularly valuable, given what we're all experiencing, and given that we don't really know where students are coming from and how they've experienced the last 4 months. Interesting. If the set established doesn't gel, to be honest, I've never experienced that, and I think that is partly to do with the facilitator as well. But I think it does take time to gel. It has to be said. And I think the gradual process of questioning and the use of questioning and listening, the intense focus on listening, I think gradually over time, participants begin to understand. They go, and the fact that there are 4 to 6 weeks often between learning sets allows time for more reflection, And so I haven't found it problematic. No, they don't. People don't circulate and identify problems in advance. They take it in turns. The turns are agreed, or they can be just be open. You know, so it could be that at the beginning of the set, somebody's presented. The next set, it's like who would like to present something. I tend to prefer to keep it open because what that does tend to allow for is people that have got some kind of burning issue or something they want to discuss will step forward. So what if one of the members of the set is difficult? It's group work. It's group dynamics. That's great. I mean, I think those are the kinds of challenges that we need to experience. And so how will the set manage that? I think that's a really, you know, I think that's a really authentic and useful thing. Yeah. So I would welcome that. And you know, you will get participants in a set who don't want to participate. But what I found in the past, having run them, gradually people begin to get pulled into it and begin to understand the value of it. I think the kind of analytical dimension and the critical dimension is really begins to emerge in really strong ways, because it's this idea of not telling but asking. I think that is really, really powerful. And as Amy says, it's quite a disciplined. It's actually a very disciplined process of only asking questions and actually, you know, learning the different ways that you can ask questions is really interesting. And I think, as they had this point about the danger of it tipping over into a therapeutic culture, I think that has to be, those kinds of things are set out at the beginning, setting out clear expectations, modelling it. There is a wealth of literature on action learning as well. It's a very well established practice, and as I said, business and law have a lot of expertise in their faculty. Time is an issue, yeah. I don't think it has necessarily to be face to face. I'm thinking about it online primarily at the moment, obviously. That does obviously change the dynamic, but we are where we are. Thank you. Those are great, really great questions, and I really enjoyed hearing what you're thinking and the kinds of things that have come up. And it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for listening. If you're interested in following this up, and then do get in touch, and you know, I'm happy to meet for a chat to you know, to discuss any ideas or thoughts you have about action learning. It's something that I'm very passionate about, and so yeah, if you'd like, just send me an email. But thank you very much for your time.
Fantastic, thank you, Julian. Really, really informative, and I've got a lot out of that as well. Perhaps if there's interest, we could form an action learning set from anyone who wants to from today.
Yeah, there you go.
So we'll put the recording onto the website. It will be ready hopefully in about 24 hours, depending on how quickly the squirrels work in the background. And if Julian's happy, are we able to share your slides as well?
Of course.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, Julian.
You're welcome. And thank you, everybody. Cheerio.